Well, welcome back everybody to Rockin' Dr. Rock's weekly update of cropping and a drought situation in the United States. So without any further ado, let's get right to the maps this week. Okay, so on this first map we are looking at the current large fires that are in the U.S. and we're looking at fires as an indication of dryness. And so the red symbols are the type 1 fires, the blue are the type 2, and then the black are other management teams other than a type 1 or a type 2 management. So they just give the type of fire. Again, you can look this up on the Forest Service website of what they are. So for example, up here, this large fire, it's a type 1 incident. The Moose Fire, 41,000 acres. 17% contained with an expected containment of the end of August. So this should be burning for the next month. It is not uncommon that this time of year some of these large fires in the west will burn until the snows start in the fall. So we'll just have to keep an eye on that. So these are current large fires. We get a better view of looking at all fires by going to this product we looked at last week, the FIRMS US and Canada, that shows all the active fires by size. And so let's zoom in on a few here and look at a few of the things that we can do with this website. So down here in New Mexico there are 2 fires. This one here is called the Hermit's Peak, 342,000 acres so far, 94% contained. So this one is pretty well under control. And then the one to the southwest of that, which is the Black Fire, also over 300,000 acres, 325,000 acres. It's 90% contained. But one of the things we can do on this site is you can zoom to location, and the graphic shows the burn area as this overlay map, so you can see how large these things are. And then one of the unique things is that over here on the right, you can see it says dynamic imagery, and there's 4 different types of products: the VIIRS and the MODIS satellites, and they each have some different types of data that are going to be real-time background to what the surface conditions look like. So let's turn on this VIIRS 20 corrected, and what we can see is that this is a current image. So cloud cover, zoom out just a little bit, and maybe in this area this is probably smoke in here, but it's kind of hard to discern smoke from clouds. So let's go down to MODIS, see what that looks like. And again, maybe some smoke in these areas. So these fires again are 90% contained, so we might not see a lot. Let's try to do the same thing with this Hermit's Peak a little bit to the north. So there's what its burn path looks like. And let's go and look at MODIS right now. So pretty heavy cloud, it looks like, in the southwest, the obscuring smoke. So let's zoom out and just take a look at at that. So most of this is cloud cover, not fire smoke. So we'll take another look at one of these fires up here in Idaho. Should be this one right here, the Moose Fire. Yes, it's 43,000 acres. Zoom to it, and now turn on the MODIS, and now we get a nicer picture of the smoke because the cloud cover is less. So you can see clouds up here around the fire, of course heavy clouds on the fire itself, but you can see the smoke trail. And so the smoke is dense, it's heavier, and you can see it's following the valleys. So all the valleys in here have the dense blue smoke. You can see it trailing down to the southeast, jumping across over to this valley and continuing to the east. And now we're in northwest Wyoming. This is Yellowstone. Here's Yellowstone Lake, and the fire smoke is coming down and looks like it's kind of converging and saturating the Grand Tetons National Park area in western Wyoming. So if we continue to zoom out, then that's pretty much the extent of the smoke. Here in the Black Hills, we are smoke-free, which is kind of an anomaly this year. The last couple of years, from sometime in the 1st of July through into September, we have been inundated with smoke. This year it has been totally clear. So the winds must be in a different direction. Okay, so that's kind of the fire situation. And again, that's an indication of dryness. And so one of the things we're going to track through on here is the evapotranspiration anomalies. And ET is evapotranspiration. Again, we talked about this in the first video. If you need a refresher on what this value is and what it means, you can go back and watch that first video. And that video will be the link in the credits at the end of this current video. So basically there's three ranges we're going to look at. The values from -50 to about 70, those are below average. That means that the vegetation is not receiving the amount of moisture that it would transpire if it were available. And so you can see that extending up through pretty much the central part of the US and then over on the west coast into Nevada. In the 70 to about 130, that is more normal activity, so about average. And then the green shades, 110 up to greater than 150, those are areas that are above average. And so you can see that there are some pretty wet areas that are extending through and fringing these extreme droughty areas. And so that's just kind of the way that these patterns go, and they'll shift weekly and of course seasonally. So one of the other things we're looking at is this index of drought, the U.S. Drought Monitor, and on this website we are using this what's called the comparison slider. We're looking at 2 weeks, so the right image is going to be the week ending July 26th with the previous image on July 19, and we're looking at drought classification. So again, everything, the colors on here, anything that's not white is drought, anything from just abnormally dry to exceptional drought in this kind of really deep red color. So if we go to the map, this is what it looked like at the end of last week. And if you recall, at the end of last week, one of the areas that we kind of highlighted was this area through Kansas into Nebraska. And at the beginning of the week previous, so 2 weeks ago, it was droughty up here in this Nebraska area, and it was droughty down here in southern Kansas, and then through the week it filled in. Okay, so this is what it looked like at the end of last week. Now what we're going to see as we draw this slider through from right to left, we're going to change the image from what it was on the what was that date? Let's go back up real quick. On the 19th to what it is at the 26th at the end of this week. And what we're going to see is big change right in here in this southern Missouri and northern Arkansas area. So let's start the slider through here, and I'm just pulling it through. And as we go through this area right here coming up, notice the large change from a severe drought to an extreme drought. And then pretty much everything else going westward has stayed pretty consistent, maybe some small changes, but not much. So this area of extreme drought up here shrunk a little bit. Some of these areas expanded a little bit, but this area right here is the area that expanded over the past week. So in all, not a large change. So one of the products then, what's called VegDry, the Vegetation Drought Response Index, and this is calculated using land cover and land use types, soil characteristics, and the ecology of the settings in these particular areas. And the VegDry value is calculated from two parameters, the Palmer Drought Severity Index, or the PDSI. And again, we looked at that PDSI map and how it's constructed and how to use it in last week's video in the introduction to this series, and so you can go back and review that to learn about that PDSI. And then it also uses what's called the SPI, or the Standard Precipitation Index, which is a 36-week value of precipitation, and it's showing trends again of everything from extreme drought down to extreme moist in the deep greens. And so for the most part, the entire seaboard, eastern and Gulf Coast and West Coast, is in some state of pre-drought to extreme drought situation. extending then up through the central part of the United States and pretty much all through the west in various conditions of drought. And then in the midst of that, again, note that up here in the northern tier, from eastern Montana across into the northern Minnesota into the Great Lakes region, it is moist. So unusually to extreme moisture up in this area up here. So good for them. You know, we're down here in the Black Hills, and we are in this moderate to severe areas. It just depends on where you're at. And again, this week, the forecast for this week coming up is 90s today, and then continuing up hundreds next week. So the next 5 or 6 days here is going to be very warm, and we'll just keep an eye on what that does to these various indexes through the coming week. Okay, so the map that really kind of culminates all this together is this NDVI map, and again, you know, normalized difference vegetative index, which is again a remotely sensed product from satellites looking at the red and infrared bands. And you can again review that in the first video of this series where we talked about that in a little more detail. But the NDVI values range from -1 to +1, and the table is shown over here in the positive values from 0 to 1. And then the deeper greens and the higher values, 0.6 above, indicate the growth stage of vegetation. So the deeper the green, typically the more vigorous the growth. And so we can see these deep green values in here. And so here in through the Appalachia regions, this is probably forest area, and there's also cropping lands in there. But notice that all the way through Kentucky, Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, in Nebraska, this is probably mainly corn, and it is coming on. And so this is very vigorous growth. It's very good. Compare that to the end of last week, and note that this whole corn area in here was just under kind of at the verge of what we would call a growth peak. And then we jump 1 week forward, and we can see how that has come on. So one of the fun things with this product is we can look daily through here and really kind of look at nuances of various parts of the country. So on the 24th, okay, this is what it was on the 24th, and again, this value 0.05 and less covered a large area of the west and southwest, with a band stretching from kind of north central Kansas all the way through to Ohio, then up into New York and in Michigan. That was very dry, and we'll see how that changes on a day-to-day basis. So we go through, this is the July 24th, here is the 25th. So great expansion of this very low NDVI, which again is associated with barren rock, sand, or snow, which this is not, but it's just showing low vegetative growth on those days. Then we go into the 26th, and again you can see the changes in here. So expansion up here. In the previous day, this kind of south central Nebraska was in the very low NDVI. You can see all Nebraska in here, and the next day it changes to where we've got growth activity in the central part of the state. Then we move on to the 27th, and kind of some vigorous growth in here now. And so day to day it is changing through here. A lot of these trends that you're seeing with what is a very low NDVI to a day or two later to very vigorous growth on an NDVI value, those are referred to as flash drought. And so this product is looking at day-to-day variation in the vegetative growth state. So it's very, very telling. Okay, one of the things that we also have to consider in here is that as crops grow and they get to their peak of growth, and before harvest, the plant will actually die. So like the wheat is green, it's growing vigorously, and then it essentially dies and it turns golden. So it's lost all of its chlorophyll type of activity, and that's what's reflecting green. and that ceases to exist, and the plant dries up, so to speak, and will have a very low NDVI value because the vegetation is not growing. So that doesn't mean the crop is no good, it just means that it's ready for harvest. So those are kind of the patterns that we'll see as we go through harvest in various parts of the country. Okay, then on the 29th, again, a swath through pretty much the central part of the nation. So in summary then, the last week for the nation saw this area of flashy drought, but an extended droughty period through the pretty much central portion of the country from west to east that kind of stayed and maintained itself. But we're seeing, again, very good, vigorous, high level of crop growth in what is the Corn Belt in this region in here. Okay, so that will wrap up this week, ending July 29, and we will continue to march forward with this, looking at this weekly. Again, go back and review the first video if you want to look at Palmer Drought Severity Index and NDVI and some of these other parameters that were more fully defined in this previous video. Again, thanks for watching. Appreciate your support. See you next week.